What disgusting secrets does your employer keep from its customers? Story 1. I worked at a self-storage place in Rockland, California. The company required every customer to sign a lease agreement stating they wouldn't hold the facility responsible if their unit was broken into or their belongings were stolen. I later found out that we had about 7 to 8 burglaries a year. The owners would get sued, but they always got off because they'd present the lease agreement in court and the judge would dismiss the case. One day I came back from vacation to pick up my paycheck and found the owner and the manager loading up a truck with items from a unit that didn't belong to them. I walked around the corner to a spot where the fence allowed me to see inside and watched as they went to another storage space, cut off the lock, and started loading the truck with a telescope, a big screen TV, and some power tools. The next day, I asked one of my coworkers about it. He told me that the storage space owners would steal items from renters and sell them, and that the owner and manager did the same thing at another property they owned in Granite Bay. I decided to quit and return to Sacramento State. I called the Rockland police to report what the owners were doing, but they said there was nothing they could do unless they caught them in the act. Story 2. A few years ago, I worked for a small business owner who kept deducting employees' health insurance premiums, but never sent the payments to the insurance carrier. After 2 to 3 months of this, our insurance was canceled, just before one employee's teenage son was involved in a fairly serious car accident. She found out at the emergency room, during an already stressful situation, that she had no insurance at all, even though she and her dependents were supposed to be fully covered. The next day, she went to the owner's office, visibly upset, to find out what happened. He gave his usual excuses, trying to justify why he hadn't sent the payments. This normally calm woman was so frustrated that she picked up a stapler and threw it at him. Fortunately, he wasn't hurt. While her reaction was certainly not appropriate, I completely understood her frustration with that deceitful man. He regularly spent thousands of dollars of company money, labeling it as business expenses, at Sam's Club on groceries and big-ticket items for his home, despite already having a generous salary. To make things worse, he took her to court for the stapler incident. After hearing the story, the judge dismissed his case and remarked that in her position, he might have done the same. Story 3. I used to work at Frisch's as a hostess, busser, and drive-through attendant. That place was absolutely filthy and corrupt. None of the kitchen staff wore gloves, and the cooks enjoyed making people eat old food or food that had fallen on the disgusting floors. The manager had a habit of stealing the waitress's tips and blaming either the customers or the less trustworthy-looking bussers. The most corrupt thing that manager did happened around Christmas time. He would take $100 out of each of the new or younger employees' cash drawers, then call their parents claiming their kid had stolen the money and needed to come in for questioning. The next day at work, I found out the same thing had happened to a few others. We were all furious, so we took the key that locked the box containing the camera controls, rewound the footage from the previous day, and watched until we caught the manager in the act. Every single one of us reported him. He was fired on the spot. It was an amazing moment. Story 4. I do music for various media around Tokyo, working with both big corporations and sketchy underground production deals. Sometimes I happen to walk past a shoot or catch a glimpse of an active set. I've even seen some adult film productions, not nearly as exciting as some might imagine. One time I witnessed a director, known for being a complete jerk, threatening an actress on set. He told her that if she kept looking gloomy during the shoot, he would take her child away, then slapped her on the head. The whole thing was so serious and cold. The look on her face as she quietly complied was haunting. I couldn't help but think about how, in a few weeks, hundreds of people would be getting off to her performance, completely unaware of the reality behind it. Since that day, whenever I see adult films, I can't help but look into the girl's eyes and wonder what's really going on. It made me feel sick to still be taking money from the same company. Story 5. At Sears, we were constantly pushed to sign customers up for services without their consent. All we needed was a phone number and email to enroll someone in the Shop Your Way rewards program. Whether they agreed or not, we would do it. The district manager told the managers to encourage this practice because it supposedly worked well in other stores to keep numbers up. Wells Fargo was shady as well. We were told to outright lie to customers to get them to a banker for opening checking accounts, claiming that our policies were changing and they needed to do it. The goal was to make sure every customer had every single product, regardless of whether it actually benefited them. One day, a blind lady came to my window with 3 separate checking accounts under her name, completely unaware of why she had them. It turned out a banker had opened them all just to meet quota. After I left Wells Fargo, I moved all my accounts elsewhere. Story 6. I worked for a company that maintained a trust account where money owed to clients was kept, and they were paid out of it. There was usually a 30-day delay between when the money came in and when it was sent out. It was a heavily regulated industry. For over 3 years, the company hadn't been paying clients and was falsifying financial records. I found out when I was told to stop sending reports showing that clients were owed money. After pressing management, I discovered they had been lying to clients for more than 3 years. One client alone was owed $1 million. This particular client was among the top 3 in the nation within our industry. There were thousands of companies owed tens of millions of dollars. I was instructed to keep lying to clients until they were so frustrated that they threatened to sue the owners. Only then would they get paid. It was common knowledge within the company and openly discussed among customer service staff. Yet no one reported it until I filed a formal complaint with the regulatory agency. Once I presented evidence and quit, the agency swooped in, seized the company records, and found that all my allegations were true. But instead of criminal charges, the executives were merely fined and required to pay back the missing money. No one was fired, put on probation, or held accountable in any meaningful way. The only consequence was that the company now has to undergo regular audits. It was infuriating. Story 7. I worked at a gelato shop where we were instructed to dig through the so-called recycling bins to retrieve used plastic cups and spoons, wash them, and give them to new customers. Even if the spoons had bite marks or were coated in chewing gum, we were told to clean them up and only discard them if they looked really bad, because according to management, these things are expensive. On top of that, all the other items that well-meaning customers placed in the recycling bin were just thrown into the dumpster. Customers regularly praised us for being a green business that cares about the environment enough to recycle. I couldn't take it anymore and reported the shop to the health inspectors, who were horrified. About 2 months later, I was laid off and the business shut down for good. Story 8. If you bring a computer under warranty to Geek Squad, we are required to perform at least a $70 diagnostic before sending it out for repairs. If we detect any viruses, the cost goes up to $190 for virus removal. I once had to remove viruses from a client's laptop and then send it off to have the hard drive replaced. Also, the $30 RAM installation fee is charged per stick of RAM, which is ridiculous. One time, when our department was struggling with sales, they brought in a specialist for an after-hours training session. He started off by saying, "If anyone is stupid enough to walk through those doors looking for a repair, they deserve to be charged $189 for it." I absolutely hated working there. Story 9. I worked overnight dairy at Walmart for a few years after moving, totaling 7 years with the company, and I hated every minute of it. In the dairy section, we often received returns or items left out in the store, and it was our job to put them back. It didn't matter how long a product had been out, whether 5 minutes or 5 hours. It would be placed in a cart and wheeled back into the cooler, often ending up back on the shelf. This was done purely for speed, not quality. If a dairy employee found milk outside the cooler, it usually went on a return pallet since we knew better than to put room temperature milk back. The store would get a refund when we sent it back to the milk company. But regular employees, trained differently, would just put it in a basket, wheel it to the cooler, and pass it on, as managers constantly pressured them to get items back on the shelf. Eggs were even worse since they came in with general freight, and there were no returns. If dairy employees found them out, they'd end up in a giant bin of spoiled products. But if anyone else found them, they'd just get wheeled back to the cooler and eventually the shelf. While working there, I got food poisoning at least 3 times. The third time, after I threw up in a mop bucket, I informed my manager, only to find out that the day-old mop water was still being used to clean the cooler because no one bothered to change it. Walmart's disregard for food safety and employee well-being was appalling. After that last incident, I walked out and never looked back. Story 10. I worked at Best Buy and always tried to be kind to customers. I took the time to get to know them, made sure they got exactly what they needed and nothing they didn't. People appreciated it and would come back to me with questions about their products. I focused on building relationships rather than just making big sales. Even if I didn't land a $2,000 sale, I valued the trust and repeat business. Management, however, didn't agree with my approach. Despite being one of the top sellers on the floor, they cut my hours, made me work inventory, even though I was in PCs, and put me on registered duty. They pushed me aside to let the more aggressive salespeople take over. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore and quit. One incident that pushed me over the edge involved a family looking for a cheap laptop for basic tasks like Facebook and Word. I spent half an hour helping them find a $300 laptop that suited their needs. After the sale, my manager pulled me aside and scolded me for not selling them the $250 protection plan. That was the last straw. I walked out and haven't shopped there since. Story 11. I've been working at a dry cleaners for a few months, and the owner is deeply involved in voodoo or some kind of black magic. I'm too afraid to ask her about it, but it's clear she's constantly evaluating customers based on their health, well-being, and some spiritual criteria. After customers hand over their clothes, she takes them to the back room and performs elaborate rituals. I've heard strange, unsettling noises and seen bizarre objects in there. Recently, I got close to the door while she was at it, and I'm pretty sure she was trying to break up someone's marriage with her chants. On another occasion, I heard her laughing for about 15 minutes straight after one of these sessions, and she came out drenched in sweat. It's definitely the most interesting job I've ever had, but it's also a bit creepy. Story 12. I worked at a major rental tuxedo store, and I can confidently say that renting a tuxedo is one of the biggest scams people fall for at least once. We've colored black collars with Sharpies and burned lapels to stop fraying, just minutes before they go out the door. Most jackets are not dry cleaned, and vests often still have gravy stains that have just been sprayed with Febreze thousands of times. My favorite part? Some jackets still have visible neck grime that won't come out no matter how much they're cleaned. We've even found wasp nests in some tuxedos, likely from the dusty corners of the warehouse. Your pocket handkerchief? It's probably made from cut-up ties. And yes, there's a rotting pile of garbage near the loading dock where the dry cleaning gets left. If you're paying $200 for a rental, know that the store probably bought that jacket and pants for $95 total. They're also the same fit and material as the non-name brands, just rebranded with labels like Vera Wang or Ralph Lauren. If your rental only cost $89.95, that tux was probably bought in 1995 and is older than some prom goers. Story 13. Arthur Murray and Fred Astaire dance studios are not what they seem. Most dance instructors there are not properly qualified and have no formal training. Typically, they start teaching after just a week or two of video training and learning from another instructor at the studio. Often, whatever the instructor learned that morning is what they'll teach to their new student that afternoon. Essentially, the instructors are just one lesson ahead of the students. Yet they charge $140 an hour, more than most doctors, regardless of the instructor's experience. The pricing is outrageous, especially considering that most of these instructors have neither the name nor the experience to justify such high fees. You can actually get lessons from renowned international instructors for half the price. The studios also base your perceived talent on how much money you spend. If you pay more, they'll shower you with compliments and dance with you during every social dance night. Spend less, and they barely acknowledge you. The ballroom dance world is full of sharks, and the ones most eager to lure you in are usually the ones who see you as prey. Story 14. I work for a casino fixing slot machines. In every slot machine, a random number generator, RNG, runs constantly and only stops when you hit the spin button. The game code has a list of all possible numbers, and when you press the button, the RNG stops on a number, which then determines the outcome. For example, when you enter a bonus round and pick boxes to see what you could have won, it's all predetermined. No matter what box you pick, you would have gotten the same result. If you win free spins, the outcomes of each spin are already decided the moment the bonus starts. I've tried explaining this to customers and family members, but they refuse to believe it. They think warming up a slot machine somehow improves their odds. The truth is, out of the 1,500 games we have, none lose money. Typically, about 80% of the money put in gets paid out, meaning the casino keeps about 20%. People think they can beat the system, but the math is clear. You will lose in the long run. Casinos are built to make money, not give it away. Story 15. I used to work at a mall kiosk selling straighteners, curlers, hair extensions, and other hair products. My job was to approach people and convince them to try the products, even though we technically weren't allowed to approach customers. Once I was threatened with a $250 fine by the mall manager because of this rule, but my manager just told me to be more discreet. The pricing was a scam. We tried to sell straighteners for $200, but the minimum we could sell them for was $100, so we'd make up fake sales to justify the price. Online, you could get the same straighteners and curlers for $30. Hair serum we sold for $75 was only $10 on Amazon. We also lied about where the products were from, claiming they were Italian, when in reality they had made in China stickers that we had to peel off before restocking. Customers were promised free exchanges, but when they came in, we hit them with a $30 exchange fee. We also sold VIP passes for free hairstyling at the kiosk, but when people showed up, most of my coworkers and the manager would make up excuses not to do their hair. I did the styling just to avoid being the annoying salesperson. After realizing how shady the business was, I did some research, found out how much cheaper the products were online, and put in my 2 weeks. Story 16. I worked at a country club pool during the summer. My former boss was obsessed with cutting costs and keeping us constantly busy, even at the expense of safety. For instance, if we heard thunder or saw lightning, we were supposed to close the pool for an hour, and if it happened again, extend the closure from the last instance. However, he would often tell us to reduce the wait time to just 15 minutes to let people back in. The pool was right next to the golf course, and about 4 times a week, golf balls would end up in the pool. Some even hit children, but he refused to install any kind of net to protect the area. To make matters worse, he frequently hit on both employees and members who were under 18. He was easily the worst boss I've ever had, and no one liked him. About 2 weeks ago, he resigned, and they found cocaine in his desk. Story 17. A few years ago, I had an internship as an equine assistant at a ranch in Brownsburg, Indiana. Working there made me so depressed that I cried almost every night. The ranch had around 20 horses crammed onto just half an acre of land, a space that ideally should only hold 1 horse. There was minimal shelter, and the entire pasture was a muddy mess during the summer. The owner had no understanding of equine nutrition, constantly changing their diets, which led to 2 cases of colic where the horses couldn't pass anything for about 48 hours. I begged her to call the vet, but she refused. Some horses had fevers and were still used on rocky trails in 108-degree heat. Others had hoof abscesses but were made to work anyway. None of the horses had received their shots in 2 years or had their teeth checked in 5, though the owner did at least take care of hoof maintenance. The worst part was that the owner was praised by many people, especially in the Indy area, for her horses and facility. She even ran a boarding facility, but I wouldn't board a horse there if my life depended on it. Diets got mixed up constantly, and 1 horse almost died from contaminated feed because of a raccoon problem. I eventually called the local ASPCA, hoping they would intervene. Somehow the owner found out and threatened to sue me. Story 18. I used to work at Real Canadian Superstore, and from day 1 I was shocked by the lack of health and safety standards. During training, I saw the seafood counter covered in about a foot of sludge, fish guts, mold, and a mix of goo, water, and blood that had built up over 2 months of neglect. They only cleaned it because the cooling system finally got so clogged that it broke, and the repairman refused to go near it. The smell was unbearable, and I've fixed septic tanks in the summer. The live fish tanks, for crabs and lobsters, were cleaned even less frequently. Safety hazards were everywhere, and we never had the proper equipment because management was too focused on cutting costs. One time, the entire store ran out of disinfectant for almost a month. Cleanliness was practically non-existent. It's shocking how many businesses violate basic labor laws and use fear tactics to keep employees in line. Young workers especially need to know their rights and stand up for themselves to ensure a safe and fair working environment. Story 19. I spent 2 years working for a Christian charity organization in India that received huge funds from churches in the United States. It was by far the worst experience of my life. Except for the 2 people at the very top, all the employees earned pathetically low salaries and worked over 100 hours a week. The organization also ran a Bible college that recruited naive young Christian converts from villages, most of whom hadn't even finished high school. They were essentially used as slave labor for every task imaginable, under the guise of hands-on ministry training. Meanwhile, the two leaders lived in mansions, had chauffeur-driven cars, and always flew first class, even for short trips. The rest of us, on the other hand, had to cover our own travel expenses out of our meager wages. Story 20. I used to work for ADT Security Services, and let me tell you, there's a good chance you're not getting what you're paying for. One common issue is that alarm systems can go years without communicating properly, yet customers still get charged for monitoring. People would often call after a break-in, asking why the police weren't notified, and it was awkward explaining that the system never actually communicated with us after the initial installation. If they had paid extra for the upgraded monitoring plan, they would have received notifications about the system being non-communicative. But basic monitoring doesn't cover that. Even worse, in some areas, ADT doesn't call the police at all. I once had an alarm go off at a house in Baltimore. I called the homeowner and she told me someone had broken in and was still inside. She was hiding in a closet, terrified. I reassured her and said I would call the police. But when I tried, I found out that ADT couldn't call the cops in Baltimore. Apparently, due to too many false alarms, Baltimore had prohibited ADT from contacting them directly. I frantically called several managers to find a solution, but there was nothing I could do. I had to call the woman back and tell her to call the police herself, insisting that she didn't have time to waste. Then I hung up. That moment was absolutely gut-wrenching. If you have monitored alarm services, keep in mind that while alarms can work as a deterrent, the monitoring services often don't. A skilled burglar will disable the alarm before it signals or be in and out before the police arrive, since cops generally prioritize alarm calls very low. In reality, most burglars are just scared off by the noise itself. The only monitored services I would actually recommend are fire and carbon monoxide alarms. They still have false alarms, but fire departments usually take those much more seriously. Story 21. I work as a night auditor at a Super 8 in a small town in upstate New York. Not many job options around here, but it keeps me busy while my boyfriend waits for a position in Portland. The hotel manager is known for being promiscuous and involved with drugs. She sleeps with a lot of the guests and hangs out with the most troublesome ones. During one season, we had some construction workers staying for a couple of months. Most were rough around the edges, and three particularly rowdy guys were placed in one room. They were constantly hitting on me during the late shifts, and I did my best to stay professional but distant. One night around 3 a.m., I was cleaning up a mess one of them left in the breakfast room when one of the guys approached me, accusing me of looking nervous. He kept pressing me about it, getting closer and making me uncomfortable. I managed to brush him off and continue cleaning. A couple of weeks later, I learned that the maid who had been lightly groped by them was actually almost raped. The men had her pinned on the bed, trying to strip her while she screamed for help. A nearby guest intervened with her pit bull and scared them off. Later, I found out that one of the guys had also beaten his wife so severely that her face was unrecognizable. The maid never pressed charges, likely because the manager, who was involved with these guys, must have offered her a raise or something. I was furious to find out the truth after walking around unaware for a month while those creeps were still there. I plan to be gone before they return next year. Story 22. I worked at a renovation product display warehouse where we hosted a home show every year to attract customers. We set up fun activities for kids, including face painting, a jumping castle, and a coloring contest. The prizes were 2 brand new scooters. One little girl was determined to win the Barbie scooter. She filled out 4 coloring sheets, even though it was 1 per kid. She spent the entire event coloring while her parents chatted with salespeople. The next day, we drew the winners, a little boy and the daughter of our second-in-command. Just as we were about to announce them, the girl's mother called to ask if her daughter had won. My boss felt guilty that an employee's kid had won, so he bought another scooter and created a new category. Cutest little girl. The only entry in that draw was hers, and when she won, her reaction was priceless. Story 23. During my time in the U.S. Army, I was stationed at several bases across the U.S. and the Middle East. One frustrating policy I witnessed repeatedly was the way unused food was handled. Straight to the dumpster. We're talking tons of perfectly edible food discarded at the end of each day. Due to the unpredictable nature of military schedules, it's hard to estimate the amount of food needed. Sometimes thousands of soldiers are out in the field or just tired of the same low-quality meals, leaving heaps of extra food. The problem is the direct-to-dumpster policy. The government claims that since taxpayers funded the food, it must be used as originally intended, to feed soldiers. Donating leftovers to food kitchens isn't considered acceptable because it's not the purpose taxpayers were promised. It's a massive waste that could easily be avoided, but bureaucracy and rigid policies prevent any real change. Story 24. I used to work at a restaurant that did a lot of catering, specializing in Southern cuisine. One of our most popular dishes was our fried chicken, so naturally customers often requested it for their events. The owner was more focused on profit than on customer satisfaction. What the customers didn't know was that the owner would charge about $8 per chicken breast. But on the day of the event, she would go to a local grocery store and buy their pre-cooked fried chicken for just 50 cents a breast. She would then bring the chicken back to the restaurant, repackage it in our catering containers, and pass it off as our own for an absurd profit. This wasn't just limited to chicken. She would cut corners and exploit customers any way she could to make a buck. It taught me to be cautious when hiring caterers because there are plenty of people out there looking to take advantage. Story 25. My first career job was working for a company that published an academic psychiatric journal. My department worked as scientific writers, but most of our funding didn't come from advertising. It came from educational grants from pharmaceutical companies. The process was disturbing. We would first write a needs assessment that highlighted the supposed necessity of a specific type of psychiatric medication. Then we'd create a request, always concluding that drug X was superior because it worked better and had fewer adverse effects compared to drugs A, B, and C. Of course, the request was always made to the manufacturer of drug X, making it seem like we were just flattering them for funding. We would then suggest so-called content experts, usually MDs, who had published hundreds of articles claiming that specific drugs were the best, to back up our claims. These were often the same experts featured on national news as reputable sources. The worst part was how we handled the science. We started from the assumption that drug X was the most effective and safest option, then selectively cited studies to support that premise. Any research that contradicted drug X's efficacy or safety was minimized or ignored entirely. We would then request hundreds of thousands of dollars to produce a special edition of the journal focused on a single topic, like bipolar disorder, while heavily promoting drug X as the best treatment. The journal looked scientific, but it was essentially an infomercial disguised as academic content. The experience left me cynical about the relationship between the pharmaceutical industry and medical publications. I learned two important lessons. If money is involved, the science is almost always compromised. And never trust brand new drugs on the market because they're still in the phase 4 market surveillance stage. That means the manufacturers are waiting to see if any serious side effects emerge once people start using them. Story 26. I worked at Walmart when a kid got hurt in the dressing room. The seat in the room wasn't bolted down properly, and when he sat on the edge, it popped up, causing him to fall and hurt his back. The kid had been in the fitting room several times that day, trying to find the perfect outfit for his Boy Scouts event that night, while his mom chatted with me. Unfortunately, he never made it to his event. After the incident, the managers did their routine procedures, made me write a statement, and the boy went to the doctor, who suspected possible permanent damage and advised a follow-up. A month later, after I had quit Walmart and moved on to another job, the mom tracked me down. Walmart had told her they had no record of who was working the fitting room that day and denied having my statement. They claimed the boy must have been goofing around and refused to cover the medical expenses. The mom asked me to call their representative, but despite my efforts, no one ever got back to me. I remembered a manager once mentioning that the fewer accidents reported, the bigger the bonuses. I was disgusted that they would lie to avoid helping a kid who could have permanent injuries just to save money. Story 27. I work at a gas station where my main job is running the deli, but I also do pretty much everything else. The store is owned by Indians, and I'm the only non-Indian employee. Sadly, they are some of the most dishonest people I've ever worked with. For instance, the cigarette prices on the wall don't match what we actually charge. They add an extra 40 cents to cheaper brands and hide the extra profit from the cigarette companies. I have to manually enter the higher prices, but when the cigarette rep comes by, I'm told to scan the real price so she doesn't notice. After she leaves, I go back to charging the inflated price. Expired items are another issue. If a customer notices an expired product and asks for a new one, my boss makes me put the old one right back on the shelf as soon as they leave. The deli is the worst. We buy bacon in bulk from a local butcher, but one Monday I found the entire box covered in mold because my coworker didn't seal it properly over the weekend. I also found discolored cheese and green-tinged raw chicken. Naturally, I threw it all out. When my boss, Kay, arrived, he dug through the trash, pulled out the moldy and spoiled food, and insisted it was still good. He told me to scrape the mold off the bacon and slice off the hard parts of the cheese, claiming customers wouldn't notice. He even argued that the chicken's green tint was normal and insisted I use it next time. His justification? Trust me, I am a pharmacist in India. Since then, I've continued throwing out bad food despite his protests. It's been a few weeks, and he hasn't fired me yet, but I'm constantly worried about how much spoiled food might end up being served. Story 28. I used to work at a restaurant that did a lot of catering, specializing in Southern cuisine. One of our most popular dishes was our fried chicken, so naturally customers often requested it for their events. The owner was more focused on profit than on customer satisfaction. What the customers didn't know was that the owner would charge about $8 per chicken breast. But on the day of the event, she would go to a local grocery store and buy their pre-cooked fried chicken for just 50 cents a breast. She would then bring the chicken back to the restaurant, repackage it in our catering containers, and pass it off as our own for an absurd profit. This wasn't just limited to chicken. She would cut corners and exploit customers any way she could to make a buck. It taught me to be cautious when hiring caterers because there are plenty of people out there looking to take advantage. Story 29. This will probably get buried, but here goes. When I was about 13 to 15, I worked under the table at a kennel nar boarding place. They're still open today, but their reputation has finally caught up with them, and people online are warning others to stay away. Let me tell you, the woman who ran that place was by far the most corrupt human I've ever met. Before anyone comes at me, yes, I reported everything I saw to the local ASPCA in the county. But somehow the owner had connections or a source that would tip her off, and things would get covered up just before anyone came to inspect. Thankfully, it looks like they're finally going out of business. First off, she didn't believe in preventive maintenance. Nothing got fixed until it was completely broken. We literally used baling wire and duct tape to keep animals from escaping. One of her sketchiest practices was during holiday seasons when boarding was in high demand. She'd always have one or two mysterious last-minute cancellations just in time for a new customer to show up. She'd show them a clean, empty run to impress them, but once they left, she'd move their dog to be doubled or even tripled up with another strange dog. We had to break up so many fights, and disease like parvo and kennel cough spread like wildfire. During big holidays like the 4th of July, New Year's, and Christmas, she built a massive barn behind a hill from the kennel. Overflow animals were shoved into crates stacked 4 high in that barn as soon as the customers left. We'd try to pull them out to walk them a few times a day, but it was a constant cycle of shit, piss, and miserable animals. She also bred dogs, mostly pedigreed ones, and even had champion stock. But she'd do shady things like swap puppies around, falsify breeding paperwork, and show customers the wrong stud. Sometimes she'd sell 12 puppies from a litter of 8, claiming they were from champion bloodlines and charging up to $1,000 each. One of her old champion studs, an amazing dog who got cancer and broke his leg, was nearly killed when her redneck husband tried to put him in a garbage bag and gas him with truck exhaust. My dad happened to be picking me up at the time and stopped him. We ended up taking the dog to be put down humanely and buried him ourselves. Working conditions were horrific. Third world level. She didn't allow us to use safety gear, like welding gloves for aggressive dogs. We got bitten, scratched, and covered in dog shit regularly. The kennel had a collapsing building for storage, with sharp metal everywhere. Flea dip fumes made me develop allergies and asthma, and the bleach fumes probably burned my lungs. The place also had a massive rat problem, and we sometimes found dead or half-eaten rats where the dogs had gotten to them. She also paid most of us under the table, including me since I was too young to legally work. She'd threaten us, saying if she got caught, we'd all go down with her. A lot of my coworkers were either underage like me, burnouts, or people who had messed up their lives. The job taught me that I needed to do well in school or end up stuck in a place like that forever. When we tried reporting her, she always got tipped off beforehand. Sometimes she'd even have us load crated dogs into a tractor trailer in the middle of the night and drive them around in circles while inspectors were at the kennel. It was messed up. After my mom died, the owner actually called my 12-year-old sister, trying to take some of our pedigree dogs, claiming my mom would have wanted it that way. My dad intervened, and I'm pretty sure some threats of violence were made. One good thing came out of that job. It made me determined to get an education and never end up in a place like that again. It paid for a lot of school trips and music, and I helped my family with bills. I didn't realize at the time that my mom's cancer was making her spend impulsively, and I was actually helping to keep food on the table. If the owner or anyone from that kennel sees this and wants to come after me, I'll testify to everything. I still keep in touch with former coworkers who will back me up. I didn't actively try to take them down because I had to focus on helping raise my sister and then building my own life. But seeing their business slowly collapse as more people learn the truth has been satisfying. Lesson learned. Never take your animal to a kennel unless it comes highly recommended, and always insist on a tour. If they refuse due to insurance reasons, it's bullshit. Find a pet sitter instead. Story 30. I used to work at Mervyn's in California back in 2008 when we were liquidating. We had to sell everything, including mismatched shoes. My task was to put all the odd-sized shoes into a trash can and carry it to the sales floor. As soon as I walked out, a crowd of mostly Mexican women surrounded me, eager to find shoes for their kids. One woman even took the trash can from me and dumped the shoes onto the floor. They started sorting through them right there, buying every mismatched pair. The strangest part was when one woman found a pair of obviously used, dirty shoes that someone had left in the pile. Despite the store being okay with letting her take them for free, she insisted on paying, and my boss charged her $3. It was one of the weirdest, most surreal days of my retail career. Story 31. I worked at a mom-and-pop musical instrument store that had been the only shop in town for decades until Guitar Center moved in. The owner started using shady practices to stay competitive. One trick was ordering cheap violins and selling them as two different models, one as a student version and the other as a pro model for triple the price. He also sold factory second guitars at full price by removing the small 2 stamps that indicated they were discounted. He never gave raises, and his best paid employees were those who helped him with shady bookkeeping practices, like hiding part of a friend's paycheck to avoid child support deductions. It was a chaotic and dishonest place to work. Story 32. I used to work at a privately owned senior care facility that catered to residents with extreme dementia and other illnesses. After a few months, I realized that more than half the staff and all the managers were corrupt and mistreated the elderly. One coworker slapped, pushed, and even spat on a woman who resisted getting dressed. When I reported it, management covered it up. We also had a resident with a colostomy bag, but management refused to give us replacements, forcing the poor woman to lie in her own waste. They blamed the night shift for abuse inspections and intentionally made our jobs harder. One night, an elderly woman with a severely bloated abdomen died because management told the staff to ignore her condition. I suspected she choked on her own fecal matter since a foul-smelling dark liquid dripped from her mouth after she passed. I quit after that. Story 33. I used to work for Best Buy Mobile, where the main profit came from protection plans and accessories. Occasionally, fraud customers would come in wanting to open multiple lines, usually choosing cheaper phones like Blackberries. Our manager forced us to maximize profit by pre-installing screen protectors and claiming they were the last ones available. He also told us to lie about protection plans being mandatory, even suggesting customers buy prepaid cards to cover the cost if they didn't have credit cards. If a customer wanted an iPhone, we'd often react negatively because they had no margin unless we sold extra accessories. I reported the manager's shady practices to corporate, but nothing was done. It was frustrating and unethical. Story 34. I worked as a seasonal worker for a State Department, and the experience was a mix of frustration and disbelief. The executives who run the department are completely out of touch, mostly pulled in from the private sector without understanding how public service works. One of the biggest issues is the obsession with buying from the lowest bidding contractors. Even though my department fights for better quality contractors, the focus on cutting costs still impacts the workers directly. Recently, the IT department was outsourced. While some of the good IT employees were hired by the new company, they lost all their accrued vacation time and state pensions. To make matters worse, the new IT team couldn't even help with basic issues like installing printer software. leaving state employees, many of whom lacked basic computer skills, struggling. A new policy also requires employees involved in accidents to pay for repairs out of pocket. These workers are already on the brink of poverty, often working multiple jobs to make ends meet, but the executives, who make $300,000 a year, remain clueless about their struggles. Sexism runs rampant throughout the department. Despite being qualified, I was pushed into an office job while male greenhorns were given fieldwork. All the women are stuck in cubicles, while men are the ones allowed to do physical tasks. It's frustrating and unfair. Story 35. Among all these stories of terrible workplaces, I wanted to share one about a genuinely great company. There's a dairy distributor in my town called Oberweis, and they do everything right. Their milk is hormone-free, we tested it in high school, and their stores don't use paper cups or plastic spoons. Instead, ice cream is served in glass sundae bowls with metal spoons. Frozen drinks come with rolled-up chocolate-coated wafer straws. They even deliver milk to your doorstep in glass bottles, and if you get a drink to go, they use minimal plastic, just a lid or a colorful spoon for kids, which doubles as a little race car toy. The stores are welcoming, with chessboards built into the tables, making it a great place to hang out with friends or family. My family has been loyal customers for 15 years, and Oberweis never cuts corners or compromises quality. It's refreshing to see a company that genuinely cares about their products and their customers. Story 36. I worked at TJ Maxx for 2 years, starting as a sales associate before becoming a customer service coordinator. My job involved providing excellent customer service, overseeing cashiers, and managing breaks and schedules. I did well at it, until the pressure to push TJX rewards cards became overwhelming. The store credit card offered a one-time 10% discount and $10 back after spending $200, but the interest rate was insane, and customers often complained about hidden fees. After the holiday season, hardly anyone wanted to open a new credit card, but management didn't care. They blamed me and the other coordinators for low-card signups, even though we tried our best. In June, after being constantly scolded and given a poor progress report, I decided I'd had enough. I quit on the spot, and suddenly they realized how valuable I was and tried to convince me to stay. I refused. The management's obsession with credit cards and disregard for employee efforts made it impossible to continue working there. I've never looked back. Story 37. I used to work for a privately owned eye doctor, initially hired to cut lenses and make eyeglasses. About 2 weeks in, the doctor completely changed my role and banned me from the lab, assigning me to sell eyeglasses instead. I hated it because the doctor charged 3 times the wholesale price for frames, while most places only marked them up 1.5 to 2 times. On top of that, the office would push expensive lenses on customers who didn't actually need them. At my previous job at iMasters, 2 pairs of glasses typically cost around $300 to $400, but at this office, a single pair often ranged from $700 to $1,300. I felt terrible selling overpriced glasses to people, knowing they didn't need them. One day, the doctor screamed at me in front of patients because I put more than 4 ice cubes in the green tea for the waiting room. That was the last straw. Story 38. When I was 17, I worked at Fridays, and it was a nightmare. Many of my coworkers did drugs, which they often brought to work, smoking on breaks and then handling food. Some even dealt drugs out of the restaurant. My manager was an ex-cop with a terrible attitude. One day I accidentally walked in on him in the office. Pretty sure he was snorting something, though I couldn't be 100% sure. He would constantly hit on me and the other young girls, inviting us to parties. I'm naturally busty, and when I didn't wear a sweater, he'd make inappropriate comments. When I rejected him, he would cut my hours and badmouth me to others. Some servers would also do gross things to food if they thought customers were rude. At the time, I thought it was justified, but looking back, it was horrible. They could have just messed up the service or given the wrong drink instead of tampering with someone's food. Story 39. I used to work at a Verizon-authorized retailer and spent about 5 years in the industry. One major piece of advice: never trust salespeople at cell phone stores. They will always push you toward the device that earns them the most commission. Many retailers avoid honoring new every 2 credits because they affect their pay. They also sell insurance through Assurian, which is a scam. They send out refurbished phones, and it's a coin toss whether they'll work until the end of your contract. Some stores even push outdated phones during clearance sales, like Palm Treos or Moto Razors from 2011, targeting customers who don't know much about phones. If a salesperson gives you their personal number and says you can call them anytime, don't believe it. They almost never answer. Always research what you want before you go in and buy online if possible. Be wary of cheap phone cases that they sell for $20, but buy in bulk for a few dollars. Know exactly what you're looking for, and don't get swayed by sales pitches. Story 40. I once worked at a family burger joint, and it was my first experience in a restaurant kitchen. I only lasted about a month because the head chef's habits were downright disgusting, and the owner didn't care at all. One of the chef's tricks was to dip cheese and use fry oil if it didn't melt properly on a burger, making it look like it was melted. He often chopped raw meat on the salad prep table and never bothered to clean it afterward. If any food dropped on the floor, he would just brush it off and continue cooking it. The walk-in freezer was a nightmare. Nothing was covered or dated. Raw and cooked meats were stored together. And once I saw him use salad dressing that was 3 years past its expiration date. He didn't care about food safety or quality. As long as it looked good on the plate and went out quickly, he was fine with it. That experience left me so grossed out that I avoided eating out for a long time. Story 41. I used to work at a well-known university in the northwest of England. Students constantly complained about how slow the university computers were. The real reason? Corruption. The IT management was constantly bribed by suppliers. Companies that wanted contracts would give the managers gifts, holidays, and even Premier League football tickets. One manager suddenly went to Spain for a week and got VIP tickets, and the following week, the company that gave the worst tender I'd ever seen got the job. The hardware was terrible. Basic core 2 Duo PCs with 4 gigabytes RAM and 100 gigabytes HDDs with no graphics card, costing the university over £600 each. You could buy the same thing for half the price at Curry's. The entire system was rigged to favor the suppliers that greased the right palms, and it drained university funds. This kind of inside corruption is why universities struggle financially. Story 42. I used to work at Arby's, and one day I started my shift only to find that the person before me hadn't put any roast beefs in the oven. I immediately reported it to my supervisor and put 2 roasts in, but they take 6 hours to cook. 3 hours in, we ran out of roast beef. Instead of waiting, the supervisor took one of the roasts out of the oven, cut it in half, put one piece back, and tried to serve the other half, still red in the middle, to customers. I refused to do it and made her handle all the beef products for the rest of the day. Arby's also has a habit of shorting customers on beef. For example, the junior roast beef is supposed to be 1.5 ounces, but usually only has 1.2. The regular should be 3 ounces, but you often get 2.6 or 2.7. The large meant to be 5 ounces typically only has about 4.4 ounces. It doesn't sound like much, but it's noticeable when comparing sizes. Lastly, not all beef slices perfectly, especially with dull blades. The slicer would accumulate scrap pieces that dried out during slow hours. Instead of throwing them away, we would use the steamer to hydrate those dried bits and mix them in with fresh beef. It was pretty gross. Story 43. I worked at a retail store where credit card goals and online ordering were prioritized above customer service. Each employee had a monthly credit card sign-up goal, and the store competed with others in the district. I didn't mind asking customers if they wanted to save 20% by signing up, but I respected their decision if they declined. Unfortunately, my coworkers didn't. We were pushed to encourage customers to open second or third cards, even if they could barely afford the first one. Some employees wouldn't even bother to check the stockroom for a size. They'd just order it online to meet their online sales goals. I often found the item customers were looking for after checking the stockroom myself. The company cared more about hitting credit card and online order targets than actually helping customers. And it was disheartening to see how little customer service actually mattered. Story 44. I worked in a government mailroom contracted through a private company, and I discovered that my manager was embezzling tens of thousands of dollars. I suspected that his boss was covering for him because anyone who reported anything to the higher-ups got fired under suspicious circumstances. To protect myself, I went through a friend of the company to report the theft. Even after proving that the money was missing, the company refused to fire the manager, claiming there wasn't enough proof that it was his fault, despite the fact that it was his site where the money vanished. It wasn't until the manager started using company vehicles for personal errands that they finally fired him. And this whole process took over 3 months. During that time, I had to pretend like I didn't know anything, smiling and making small talk with him as corporate kept investigating. When they finally let him go, they spun a story about why he was fired and kept his assistant, who either knew about the theft or was too incompetent to notice it. I got a handshake and a measly 0.5% raise during my annual review. I quit shortly after, feeling completely unappreciated and disillusioned. Story 45. I worked as a dispatcher for a towing company during night shifts in college. The company had pre-signed forms from apartment complexes allowing us to tow vehicles that blocked the lot. This was meant to save managers from having to come out late at night. However, the drivers abused this system, regularly picking up cars from these complexes without being called. They'd roam around looking for cars to tow, whether they were parked illegally or not. We charged $125 per day for storage, and since the cars would come in around 11:50 p.m., by midnight, we were already charging for 2 days of storage. One night, a woman came in crying because her son's car had been towed, even though it wasn't parked illegally. I checked the records and realized the apartment complex never called for a tow that night. I went to her house, told her what happened, and suggested she demand her money back from the complex. When the company found out I had done this, they fired me. I couldn't stay silent after seeing people get ripped off, but standing up for what was right cost me my job. Story 46. I worked at Bix Pickles many years ago as a student. When cucumbers came in large crates from farms, they often contained dead mice, snakes, cats, or other animals. Although they would clean and sanitize the crates, if something like that made it onto the production line, the general managers would just remove the dead animal and keep the line running instead of properly cleaning everything it had touched. The only time the line ever stopped was if there was a glass breakage. One time, an employee cut her hand on a slicer, bleeding quite a bit, but the line didn't stop at all. Sometimes cucumbers would fall off the line and pile up on the dirty cement floor, and the cleanup crew would use dirty shovels to put the top layer of the pile back into production. The place was poorly managed and disorganized, with most employees working under harsh conditions and extreme heat. I quit after the girl got injured and didn't even formally resign, yet my time card kept getting swiped for a few months, so I kept getting paid. Eventually, Smucker's bought the plant and it shut down within a year. Story 47. I worked at one of the largest coffee shop chains in the country, and hygiene was practically non-existent. No one was properly trained, so hand washing and changing rags were rarely enforced. At one store, changing dirty rags was actively discouraged, even when they were visibly filthy. Mistakes in orders were common, like serving regular drinks instead of skinny ones because it was easier. We also used the same cooking equipment for products with meat, nuts, and allergen-free items. But soy milk requests were always honored since milk allergies seem more important than nut allergies. One location routinely denied us breaks and made us work unpaid overtime. On one public holiday, I worked for 11 hours without a break and wasn't paid for the extra 4 hours I stayed after my shift ended. When I complained to head office, I was fired 2 weeks later for being unwilling to put in a little extra effort. Story 48. I worked for over a decade at one of the top pediatric children's hospitals in the world. The patients received excellent care, but the IT department was a disaster. Security was practically non-existent. Anyone with AD credentials could access shared directories that were misconfigured, including a Dropbox containing medical images, like autopsy photos of children. These were world-readable, and despite reporting the issue multiple times, it was never fixed. All Windows computers had the same local administrator password, which never changed for decades. Anyone who had ever worked in tech support at the hospital knew it. Worse, most network ports on campus were active, meaning that anyone with a laptop and the local admin password could connect to any powered-on PC and browse its contents. Management refused to address these glaring security risks as they considered the setup useful for tech support. There were even more severe data privacy violations involving medical records, but those are too sensitive to detail. The whole situation was a ticking time bomb for data breaches and massive fines. Story 49. I used to work in a call center, and it's not much of a secret that the main goal is to get you off the phone as quickly as possible. We were actively encouraged not to issue refunds, which is why you often get put on hold or transferred multiple times. If your problems seemed difficult or you sounded like a challenging customer, The representative would just transfer you, essentially sending you back into the call queue. That's why the next person who picks up has no idea who you are or what you need. Most call center agents don't actually work for the company you're calling. They're usually employed by a telemarketing company and just use software to find answers. In reality, you might know more about your phone than they do. If you find a call center agent who spends more than 5 minutes genuinely trying to help, be nice and thank them. They're risking their job to actually take care of you. I was one of those people, and even though I was praised for calming irate customers and solving problems, I was put on an action plan because my calls took too long. Eventually, I quit because I couldn't stand the pressure to rush through calls without truly helping. Story 50. I'm a developer, and I used to work at a firm that processed financial data for big companies, including handling 401ks, payment processing, and annuities. You might not know the firm, but you definitely know the clients. Major financial institutions. One of our tasks was calculating commissions for financial advisors. Sometimes we were given the wrong data, and sometimes we made mistakes. One time I calculated how much a previous error had underpaid a group of agents. It totaled in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Despite generating similar reports annually for years, almost none of the affected agents were paid back unless they caught the mistake themselves and complained. Worse yet was the lack of computing security. Unsanitized inputs and poorly protected data meant that anyone with a valid login could potentially access and steal financial information. One time I asked a coworker how data backups worked, and he found out that no backups had been made for months. Nobody had noticed. I left as soon as I could. The company's lack of responsibility and security was a disaster waiting to happen. I didn't want to be around when that time bomb inevitably went off. Story 51. My first job was at a small business run by a man who almost exclusively hired young high school girls. He constantly made inappropriate comments about his employees and customers, both behind their backs and directly to their faces. When I was 18, he once commented that my perfume turned him on while we were getting food from the freezer. He was married with 2 kids, which made it even creepier. He also spent hours alone in his office and would minimize whatever he was looking at on his computer whenever I walked in. One time, I caught a glimpse of a smutty web page. Eventually, I quit. Later, I found out that he had been a manager at another store within the same corporation, but was fired for sexual assault. Shockingly, the company rehired him and gave him his own franchise despite the previous complaint. Story 52. I used to work for a grocery store chain in upstate New York, and the stores had severe rodent problems. Rats would sometimes fall out of the ceiling into the produce cooler while employees were cutting fruit, and several were killed on the chopping block. The pizza trays were never washed, which was especially concerning given the mice problem. One of the stores also had a massive roach infestation, with baby roaches sometimes found inside the donuts. Despite customer complaints, the issues were somehow kept quiet. The whole situation was absolutely disgusting. Story 53. I used to work at Domino's, and the pizza sauce came in bags as a concentrate. We'd squeeze it out, add water, and mix it with a giant whisk. One day, my manager saw me throwing out a sauce bag and thought I hadn't squeezed out enough. He pulled the bag out of the trash and made me scrape the remnants into the sauce. Now, I work at a popular chain restaurant, and the hygiene is equally questionable. Food constantly comes into contact with bare hands before reaching customers. If a customer requests a salad without onions and it's made incorrectly, we just pick the onions out ourselves and serve it. Servers sometimes eat fries off plates before delivering them. I've even seen the back of house guys sweating into desserts. Don't trust food prepared out of your sight if germs bother you. Story 54. I used to work as a cook in a sports bar, Jocko restaurant specializing in chicken wings. During playoff seasons, we were insanely busy, with multiple people working each station. While the training emphasized sanitation and food safety, reality often didn't match the standard. When the rush hit, some cooks would cut corners. If we were low on plates, they'd spit shine dirty ones. If raw chicken wings fell on the floor, they'd just pick them up and toss them back into the tub. There was also a maggot infestation by the dumpster. As the new guy, I was the one stuck cleaning it up. One day I burned my hand badly, but still had to work the next day with a huge blister the size of a tennis ball.